experience in the area of information security, concentrating on social and psychological factors motivating malicious online actors, hacking groups, and cyber terrorists. Max has written and co-authored a number of journal articles and book chapters on profiling the social structure of hacking community, cyber violence, and emergence of cyber terrorism. Over to you, Max.
Thanks. Yeah, you want to get me there. That. No. There we are. Oh, that looks okay. Like maybe. Perfect. Great. Okay, so let's get started. Let's talk a little bit about terrorism and cyber terrorism. I'm a social psychologist by training, so I look more at the human factors part. So I want to start out with looking at some sort of strategic foundations to the approach of terrorist use of cyber. What's really interesting is the current evolution of digital and cyber-related technologies. It's not only growing, but it's really accelerating. And there are two sort of distinct forces. There are engineering forces at work in this marketplace, where engineers are going, wow, I made this really cool device for the Internet of Things. Now if you could talk to this, that would be really good. Let's make that happen. And then there are marketplace or consumer forces, where consumers are going, I want this device to be able to talk to this and be able to do that and talk to this. And so there's these huge marketplace pressures to basically interconnect systems. And while we're, putting forth efforts to secure these elements, it's inevitable that the rate at which these new devices and networks are emerging is far outstripping our ability to defend them. And remember, this consumer marketplace is really sort of it's very much a pressure in terms of first to market. So that means if the person who gets first to market is going to have a huge advantage. So that means, first of all, you don't want to spend the time securing that thing. The second thing is you don't want to spend the money securing that thing either. So basically the economics is creating kind of this vulnerability environment that's not a very happy thing. A lot of, defense is good. We've heard a lot about defense today, and I don't want to denigrate it at all. And much of our information security strategies currently in place are defensive and sometimes reactive. But you have to think about, it's not just defensive strategies. I mean, defensive strategies without vision may not always be the best choice. There's this old saying in the West, when there are threats, you circle the wagons, from the old days and circle the wagon trains. But it's interesting. If you listen to what historians really say about the Old West, there may be some lessons learned about circling the wagons. So what's really interesting is that, for example, if you look at what historians say about the death rates, only about 5% of the settlers, so about 500,000 settlers that moved from east into the west into the wilderness, actually died. And most of them died, only 5% of those fatalities were due to hostiles. The rest of the fatalities were due to weather, getting run over by a wagon, drowning in a stream crossing, illness, all sorts of other things that basically weren't hostile related. Because what's interesting is the Native Americans, the Sioux, the Lakota, they were good business people. They were making a good living basically guiding these settlers through the wilderness. And, a business plan that says kill off your clients and steal their stuff really doesn't work very well. So it's kind of interesting. And circle the wagons, while a short-term, pretty good defensive strategy, mid to long-term wasn't so fabulous. If you look at it, when you circle the wagons, you basically don't have mobility anymore. You're static target. That's not so good. good. When you circle the wagons, it's hard to get started again. It's going to take you a while. That's going to make you vulnerable. You're going to have all these drivers, basically, who used to have guns. Now they're sitting on top of the wagon with reins getting ready to go. So you're going to lose a lot of your firepower. If you tried to send somebody for help, the problem was often the help was days away. And on top of that, the Native Americans, they would just like pick them off. And if the Native Americans needed help, they would just basically send a scout to another village and say, hey, we've got this wagon train. You want to share? Let's take it out. So anyway, sometimes defensive strategies are not the thing you want to always focus on, but you want to think into the future. You want to think about future scenarios. What are the potential possibilities of taking this technology and combining it with that technology? That's really where we want to do. We want to construct future scenarios, because that's one way in which we can help deal with the future. We can help policymakers push resources into areas where we think they're going to be most helpful. Let's see. Yeah, I kind of said that. Okay. We'll move on. So when we develop these sort of future cyber terror scenarios, we think about what might happen. One of the things that you might want to think about doing is incorporating basically psychological and social factors into the construction of these future cyber terror scenarios. It's often forgotten that cyber threats don't just sort of arise out of machines. If you look back in the kill chain far enough, you look back in the chain of events, you will find a person. And that's something that we should never forget. So in the following slides, I'm going to discuss some of the psychological factors that play a part in the motivations of malicious online acts, and also we'll talk a little bit about meso-level phenomena and macro-level social dynamics that may play a role in the cyber terror environment. So let's roll back to the psychological roots of cyber terrorism. There's been a lot of attention paid to the psychological roots of traditional terrorism. Post and Hoffman, among others, have done pretty fabulous work. It's been covered quite a bit. But if you look in the literature, looking for psychological factors for cyber terrorism, there's much less attention. There's almost nothing there. The digital environment also, it has some really unique properties, so that understanding the complexities of psychological foundations of cyber terrorism, you can't just sort of I'll just move these traditional terrorism motivations and social processes into the cyber terrorism role. It doesn't really quite work that way. Now, some of the early research by one of my friends, Francesca Bosco and her associates, they originally started doing the traditional hacker profiling stuff in the old days, and then eventually they turned their attention to starting to look at the characteristics as cyber terrorism. And also Mark Rogers, he wrote an article, one of the few you'll find on the psychology of cyber terrorism. But if you read that article, you don't really see a whole lot about psychology. You see mostly things about environments that sort of encourage people to commit malicious acts, and not very much about the psychology of it. So there really isn't a lot to be had in that particular area of research. So a number of years back, I created this sort of taxonomy of motivations of online malicious actors. Now, there's a real sort of key part to that, and that is, I originally did it just for the hacking community. Oh, someone did something sort of malicious, and I put these 6 motivations up. But the nice thing about theory is, I said, oh, these are motivations of malicious online actors. I didn't say they were hackers. I didn't say they were cyber criminals. I didn't say they're cyber terrorists, malicious online actors. So the classification system and the theory that surrounds it applies to the hacking community, applies the cybercrime community, applies the cyber terrorism community, which is actually pretty cool, because theory is really a very, very powerful tool for a social scientist. So let's just pop to the next slide. So here are the 6 motivations. It's a play off the old, just went to escape. Okay. It's a play off the old MICE, counterintelligence term. You know, the FBI used to say, well, why do people betray their country? It's money, it's ideology, it's compromise, it's ego, MICE. Actually, I think the FBI stole it from some DOD personnel agency. It wasn't even really theirs. So we're just going to modify that a little to the 6 motivations for malicious online acts. It spells Mises. That's a good way to remember it, and it's money, ego, entertainment, cause, entrance to social group, and status. And we'll just spend a couple minutes or a minute or so on each of these just to get sort of an idea of what they're like. Money. So it's no news to anybody. A very common motivator in the cybercrime world, not necessarily the hacking world, because in the hacking world back in the old days, if you hacked stuff for money, you were shunned. But the cybercrime world, and at some point, perhaps the cyber terror community as well, if it emerges. Individuals motivated by money are usually found in hacking groups that have other individuals that are also motivated by money primarily, and there's a lot of assets out there to be had, currencies that are out there, including stolen credit cards, stolen financial credentials, root ownership of compromised machines, unique exploits, virtual assets like QQ coins, secret data, bitcoins, and other digital currencies. There's a lot of that stuff floating out there for people to acquire and trade and convert. Now, what's interesting is anthropologists have spent a lot of time studying the effects of cultures where there hasn't been money, and all of a sudden money has been injected or introduced into that culture. And it causes a lot of changes in the social structure and the way people interact with each other and all sorts of other different psychological and sociological changes. It really does have a tremendous shift on that culture. So if you're interested in the Anthropology of Money by Maurer, that's really a pretty fabulous book to take a look at. And money also acts as a force to attract individuals who are outside the community. So the traditional hacking community, suddenly there were people from the outside, people from organized crime coming in. And money as a social object gave these outsiders opportunities for power and prestige inside the hacking community that were formerly not available to you. So it really sort of made a tremendous shift in that culture. Ego. Ego is just derived from the satisfaction that comes from overcoming technical obstacles, creating code that's elegant and innovative. You know, white hat, black hat, whatever. All people are sort of motivated by ego. There's the idea of a mastery over the machine, getting to do what you want in spite of numerous security obstacles, things like that. And for cyber terrorists, there's that enticing idea of besting a nation state. Entertainment. A long time ago in the hacking community, there was a fair amount of entertainment-motivated activities that you might classify as a bit malicious, and then it disappeared for like decades. And in recent years, it's come back, and come back significantly. And part of that reason is there's this huge infusion of sort of less technical individuals in the digital space. Everybody's online, regardless of what kind of technical skills they have. So there are lots of sort of like targets wandering around everywhere. There's expanded social environment. There are lots of virtual spaces like Second Life and things like that, where you can go and commit acts. So you've got people emerging like griefers, people who generate lulls, which is basically malicious acts where individuals find joy in disrupting another individual's emotional equilibrium. So entertainment is one of these causes. Cause is probably the most serious one from a national security perspective. Most common instance, hacktivism, the use of the internet to promote some social, economic, political, ethnic, cultural cause. There are many levels of magnitude, basically all the way from like web defacement to theft of sensitive documents to attacks on critical infrastructure. It's the most traditional cause for terrorism and cybertism, the one place where you sort of think that obviously they're going to intersect. Entrance to social group, hacking groups tend to be status homogenous. That is, they tend to have individuals in them that have similar levels of skills. Now, they're not the same thing. One guy might be a kernel guy, another guy might be a network security guy, et cetera, et cetera. But for the most part, generally have similar levels of expertise. And what that suggests is that how do you gain entrance to one of these groups? Well, you can't just walk up to them and say, hey, hi, I'd like to join your hacking group. I think you're cool. It's like you're going to get nowhere. So basically, what you do is you write some elegant code, you write some sort of exploit, and you show it to one of the guys, and they say, oh, that's pretty cool. I guess you're okay. You can join your little group, and they grab the exploit, and they use it. The final one is status. It's a reasonable assumption that the hacking community is a meritocracy, basically where your skills and expertise in networks or operating systems or hardware or whatever basically determines your status both locally, regionally, and globally. And it's a powerful traditional motivator both within the hacking community and very likely if there's an emerging cyber terror community, it might happen there as well. So, and one of the interesting things I want to say before we leave that is that when you think of cyber terrorism, you always think of like, oh, web defacement, oh, this political cause, oh, this whatever. But remember, cyber terror is a malicious online act. And that means that technically any of those 6 motivations could be responsible for a cyber terror act. So what that suggests is in the future, it may not just be cause, it might be money that creates a cyber terror attack. It might be ego. Hard to say. So what's happened is the pool of individuals in terms of motivation that might commit a cyber terror act has gone from this to more like this. It's a lot bigger, and that's concerning. So one of the things I've talked about wandering through the halls of Washington off and on is basically the idea or concept of the civilian cyber warrior. That is, in the old days, before the internet, if you were in country A, you were a citizen of country A, and country B did something bad, you might write a letter to the president of country B. Oh, you were a bad person, don't do it again. Yeah, not very effective. You might go down to the embassy and demonstrate. And what would that get you? Basically, billy club in the head and a night in jail. You might take all your money in your savings account and go fly to country B and try to blow a building up or something. But basically, often what happens is you blow yourself up, or you get caught, or if you manage to blow it up, you're often caught shortly afterwards. So it's generally not a very happy outcome. Now comes the internet. So I can sit in my room at home and attack the nation state, and I'll have a low probability of apprehension, a higher probability of success, a lower cost of developing or deploying attacks, and orders of magnitude increase in potential damage. And what that really does is sociologists for decades have studied the power relationship between nation states and individuals. And what this does is it dramatically changes the nature of that power relationship. And that is something that we want to think carefully about. A colleague and I, Tom Holt, did a study not too long ago, probably one of the only transnational cyber terrorism studies in the open literature. We did sort of a 4-cell experiment where we have type of attack is either cyber or physical, and the target of the attack is either foreign country or their own homeland, so domestic terrorism. And we started looking at some bivariate relationships in terms of software piracy acts, and they were correlated with willingness to engage in a cyber attack and things, but we realized that it really needed a more complex model. So we started running multivariate models. One of them was a cybercrime model, one of them was a political predictors model, and then we combined them together. And a lot of more interesting things came out. But we also realized this is a lot more complex set of relationships than we ever thought. We're still working on this data set. So, but we've discovered some things like in-group, out-group antagonism. That is, basically, you have antagonism for somebody who doesn't belong to your group, but outside the group. Positively correlated with willingness to commit a cyber terror act. Ineffective law enforcement responses, cybercrime, along with out-group antagonism, willingness to commit a physical terrorist attack, and willingness to commit a physical terrorist act, positively related to attacking a military server, cyber attack. All sorts of really pretty interesting things, but we're still working on. There are two results that we really want to take out of this that are important. The first one is there's a very high correlation between the intention to commit a cyber terrorist attack and a traditional physical terrorist attack. So where we've been sort of worrying about hybrid attacks, I think that's a good thing to be worried about. The second thing is sort of a good news, bad news kind of thing. The good news is only about 1% of the respondents basically proposed a really very serious attack, cyber attack. But that's also kind of the bad news. If you have 220 million adults in the United States and 1% of them at the top of the funnel would intend to commit a serious cyber attack on critical infrastructure, that's a lot of people. So, something to sort of think about. We're going to talk just for a minute about meso-level dynamics of cyber terrorism. Studies of traditional terrorist groups can be useful in understanding power relationships. Schreier talks about hard links and soft links. Hard links might be something like here's some explosives, I'll lend you some weapons, things like that. Soft links between terrorist groups might be things like we're going to commit this terrorist act, but we'll let you claim credit for it. Not a problem. So, network studies among cyber terrorist groups, I haven't found any in the open literature. It's just like zip. But my colleague and I and a couple other people studied some Russian hacking gangs, and we did a social network analysis on them. So just really quickly, this top chart, basically, if you look at these lines, the little blue dots, are different Russian hacking gangs. The thickness of the line indicates the strength of friendship and communication channels between the hacking groups. That's kind of interesting. This other thing down below, it's a little harder to see, but basically it's a social network analysis of actors, the graph, and the little white dots mean not very serious actors. The red dots mean serious threat actors that you should take seriously. And we found sort of two types of groupings. The first one's right up here. You see these red guys in the middle, very high density networks. A lot of people know them. There's a lot of communication. So that's one set. And then there's this other set out here of serious threat actors. These red dots on the left, your left, basically where they're really isolated. Maybe they're practicing operational security, not really sure. So that may be where you might want to be much more concerned out there. Relationships with nation states. Healy does a really fabulous job. He's this 10-point scale that talks about the level or magnitude of relationship between a cyber hacking gang and a nation state, going from basically the nation states trying to prevent what's happening all the way on 10, which is basically the nation states encouraging them, employing them, etc. So this is a really great relationship for people because, where am I? This is really good. This is really interesting because it's a great relationship because nation states get to distance themselves from cyber terrorism and terrorist groups to help deter attribution, things like that. Upcoming paper I'm working on right now, my editor's beating on me to finish the book chapter on this sort of evolution, this relationship between hacking groups and nation states. What's interesting is, the thing I like to compare this to is the rise of these powerful hacking groups, sort of like the tiger, the little tiger cub. Oh, it's cute, and you raised it from a cub, it was an orphan, and you're taking care of it, and it gets bigger and bigger and more powerful, and one day it bites your hand off. So one of the things interesting about these couplings between nation states and cyber terror groups is the cyber terror groups are going to get increased technical skill with the potential to threaten their very own the nation state sponsor. Proceeds from financial crimes will basically help them buy more hardware, software, make payments to their members. Associations with the nation's security services basically helps immunize them against attacks from other people. Don't touch those guys. They're in with the Bureau of State Security. We don't want to mess with them. We're almost at the end. Cyber terrorism in the military. One good example I use cyber spearing, basically committing cyber terror acts against specific high-profile targets. So they might include political or military or government officials. Might be a hybrid attack where you basically track a high-level government official driving a specific vehicle from home to work. And basically you figure out the make and the model of that vehicle, you figure out how to hack it, and you basically take out his brakes on the freeway. Boom. Cyber terrorism used as a force multiplier. So, for example, establish some sort of geographic military flashpoint. Ukraine's a good example. Ukraine and Crimea. Basically, you have weapon systems facing each other on both sides. So, cyber terrorists basically take control of something like this missile system, and then they basically launch a kinetic attack against the other side, who says, "Hey, look, they just launched missiles at it," and they launch missiles back, and the conflict starts. And finally, talk about the emergence of a cyber terror community. I first started looking at hacking community and studying the social structure. I don't think, how much time do I have? Where am I? Almost done? Yeah, okay. So let's flip this slide. But basically, study the social structure of the hacking community, was able to get data and analyze that data and show changes across time. It's pretty cool. You can talk to me about it afterwards. The last paper I did was in September, I think, for the Army War College, for the Strategic Studies Institute there, talking about the potential emergence of a cyber terror community or movement. Using new social movement theory, I looked at the digital community and said, here's Epic 1, basically the hacking community. It's rise, and it's kind of like, now headed down this way. Epic 2, the emergence of a cybercrime community. It's on its way on. I have 10 minutes? Really? Oh, no, he says 3 minutes. All right. And finally, using that social theory, thinking about the possibility, the probability of the emergence of a cyber terror community. Will it form? What does it look like? How likely is it to evolve? And the conclusion of the paper is, I think there's a reasonably fair or high chance that a cyber terror community may be Epic 3. And so it waits to be seen exactly what it's going to look like. I'm still thinking about this, still working on that. And somebody asked, well, what about Epic 4 and 5? I said, hey, 3, that was really tough. Don't talk about 4 and 5. So anyway, I think I'm at the summary. Basically, what I'd like you to take away today is developing future cyber terrorism scenarios is likely to become a key element, I hope, in fighting cyber terrorism. These scenarios will assist information security professionals and policymakers in mounting a more proactive approach to cyber terrorism. Integrating human behavior into future cyber terrorism scenarios is likely to significantly enhance their value and their effectiveness. And finally, the emergence of a cyber terror community is probably a likely event, and the sooner we begin preparing for it, the more likely we can influence the outcomes of the conflict. And I'm probably just out of time right now. Whew, that's it. Thank you.